This is a special 5th anniversary edition of the France 24 debate. We're with writer and filmmaker Claude Lanzmann, Viviane Reding, Vice President of the European Commissioner. She's the EU Justice Commissioner. Stephen Clark, author most notably of 1,000 Years of Annoying the French. From Washington, Financial Times and Weekly Standard columnist Christopher Caldwell, author of Reflections on the Revolution in Europe. And The Independent's Middle East correspondent Robert Fisk, author of The Age of the Warrior. On a day back in May, smack in the middle of that Arab Spring that we were mentioning before the break, the entire world suddenly got a jolt. It was really almost a throwback to a bygone era.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
Robert Fisk, you interviewed Osama bin Laden on several occasions. When he died, people sort of had almost, I wouldn't say forgotten about him, but he'd become almost an anecdote, it seems.
Yeah, I think he was a has-been, as we say in English. I think Al-Qaeda had chiefly failed to do what it said it would do. Over and over again, bin Laden said, and he said to me personally, we are going to overthrow the Western satrap dictators of the Middle East, you know, the Mubaraks, the Ben Alis, the Gaddafis, the Bashar al-Assads. And in the end, he failed, and al-Qaeda failed. And it was the people of these countries that overthrew or are overthrowing their leaders. And what is important, of course, is that in these various revolutions, and I was in Tahrir Square, I've been in Tunisia, I've been in Bahrain, I've been in Syria, I haven't seen a single picture of Osama bin Laden, nor have I seen any poster saying that al-Qaeda is in some way an inspiration. So the whole al-Qaeda project, which began long before 9/11 and the international crimes against humanity in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, was a failure. And I think that by the time, Obama was trumpeting the murder, for execution, that's what it was, of Osama bin Laden, the whole thing was out of date. Although, of course, the Americans managed to try and pretend it was still this sort of vast crocodile spreading its tentacles or its teeth across the Middle East and elsewhere. I think al-Qaeda, it still has some power, of course, and can use it. But essentially, politically, socially, even religiously, it's finished. And I think, I remember my reaction when I heard, of course, very quickly that Osama had been killed, Osama bin Laden had been killed. I said, well, those who live by the sword die by the sword, but he failed and he's a has-been, and it doesn't matter anyway, even if he stayed alive in his rather squalid villa in the outskirts of Abbottabad.
Now, no longer a reference, there's a common thread between the Arab Spring and the other major story that we're discussing, a fundamental shift in the balance of power across the world. On the morning of September the 15th, 2008, the outgoing U.S. president stepped up to the microphones in the White House Rose Garden. He was in the company of Ghana's president, and he tried to soothe nerves, this after the sudden failure of a Wall Street investment bank called Lehman Brothers.
I know Americans are concerned about the adjustments that are taking place in our financial markets. At the White House and throughout my administration, we're focused on them. And we're working to reduce disruptions and minimize the impact of these financial market developments on the broader economy.
Minimize the impact. Christopher Caldwell, we kind of know what happened next.
Yes, and I think that the quotation by President Bush that will go down in the history books is the one from a few nights later when he went into a closed-door session of Congress and told the assembled congressmen, this sucker could go down. And I do think that you're right in drawing in drawing the lesson from this episode that the big significance of it over the long term will be that it was both a cause and a symptom of the long ebbing of Western power, and in fact, I think that one thing that Westerners still have not fully absorbed is that this crisis has sort of exposed as very fragile the financing of their whole way of life. And a lot that we've taken for granted, certainly American military might, the so-called European model of welfare provision, the enviability of Western political structures, all of that is starting to come into question. And that's why this finance crisis really strikes me as the real epochal event of the last 5 years.
The long ebbing of Western power, that's, do you agree with that, Vivian Redding, with that assessment, that that's what this financial crisis signals?
No, I do not agree with this at all, and I do not agree that the European model is going down. I think we have to go back to the perspectives. Europe is the strongest economy in the world, has the biggest GDP in the world. The euro is a strong currency. So we are facing problems in this moment, and we are going to solve these problems. But those are momentary problems, and they are certainly not problems which will put the whole model into question.
5 years on, though, the financial crisis has morphed into a sovereign debt crisis, one the Eurozone treaty hadn't really factored in. Over the next 3 days, EU leaders will be sitting down in Brussels under pressure from the markets to sort it out. And Vivian Redding, I want you to listen to what the French and German leaders said. This coming out of a meeting here in Paris on Monday. They sounded pretty insistent that it was their deal or no deal. Let's listen.
It's very clear, as quick as possible on the basis of the agreement between France and Germany and open to other member countries.
Of course, we will be talking to the European Parliament, and we will make sure that there is no misunderstanding. We are determined, and we would like a decision to be made during the Council meeting.
Well, they're saying she'll speak to the European Parliament. She doesn't say she'll consult it. And Sarkozy, the same press conference, saying the future of Europe, quote, lies with the governments of Europe. At the European Commission, do you feel sidelined by the statements that were made yesterday?
I feel relieved that two big nations in Europe take things in hand and go to the same path which has already been prepared for the several months. You see, Europe needs a strong French-German engine, but an engine is not enough to make an airplane fly. The direction must be given by a pilot, and I really feel that the Commission is the pilot, and the way the 27 nations are going to follow at the end of this week is going to be a way how together we can get out of the crisis. So engine, yes, but pilot, no.
When both Sarkozy and Merkel say we can do this deal at 27, but we can also do it at 17, the 17 that are inside the Eurozone, do you feel that's a dangerous path for Europe to try to maybe do what you could say is a smaller deal between just the Eurozone nations?
I think it is very important that we decide to go ahead with 27. Of course, if we would be stopped in our way by some slow members, then it might be better to go ahead with lesser than 27. But the goal has always to have everybody on board, and that is what is going to be tried also in the next coming days.
Stephen Clark, do you get the feeling that Europe is coming apart?
As we sit here, you can hear it if you listen carefully, falling to pieces. I just found it all so sad because basically what it comes down to is back in 2008, people suddenly realized that the banks who had been taking all our money and all the country's money had been doing really stupid things with them. They'd been lending the money to people who couldn't pay it back, and they knew, or they suspected they might not be able to pay it back. They'd been taking really bad management decisions, doing whatever they wanted with our money. Then there was a crisis, and they wanted more of our money to bail them out. And now we're seeing the results. And I don't know what the politicians are going to come up to, because I'm not come up with because I'm not an economist, but it does make me really angry that these people who are doing this bad financial management are sort of now on the sidelines waiting to see what's going to happen with the euro, whereas they should be in there, propping it up themselves. The Americans have got to bow out. It's not our problem anymore. But their banks were also in there, and we're suffering from their problems. It seems that Europe's been kind of left on its own by the Americans, although the Americans sort of partly caused the problem.
Robert Fisk, you draw a parallel between the huge protests we've seen in the Arab world and the Occupy Wall Street movement we've seen recently.
Yeah, I think it's. I think the fact that demonstrators take over streets and build tents and so on. I think this is in America and Europe. This is just copycatting the Arabs. But where there's a connection is quite clear. In the Arab dictatorships, there had grown up, or rather infantilized, a situation in which the individual dictators, the Mubaraks, the Ben Alis, the Gaddafis, the king and emirs of the Gulf, and of course Bashar al-Assad, they all believed for many years, and some of them still do believe, that these countries are their private property, that they actually have title deeds to the country, and that their people, or the people who live in that country, are basically serfs who go about their work and will be imprisoned if they don't obey the headmaster. They're always treated as children, and they were given fake elections, fake governments, etc. What's happened in the West is there weren't dictators as such. The people bought the democratic pound or euro a long time ago, but they too found that they would go to vote in what became a kind of fraudulent democracy. They would vote for their representatives, members of the National Assembly, Senate, Congress, House of Commons, whatever. But then, when they had given their democratic power to the governments gave that power to the banks. And the banks began to play the role of the Arab dictators. They ran the country. They treated the country and its currency as their personal fiefdom, their personal property. And that is the connection, that what the people in Europe in these protests, and in America, Wall Street and so on, what they're trying to do is very much what the Egyptians have, almost tried to do, what the Tunisians appear to have done, what the Syrians are trying to do. They're all saying, this country belongs to us. It does not belong to the banks. It does not belong to the dictators. The banks are the dictators of the Western world. And that is the reason why there is a direct connection.
Viviane Reding, what's your reaction to that? Do you feel as though, for instance, with the current reform that's being discussed, you regret the fact that there isn't, for instance, more powers for democratic institutions like the European Parliament?
Well, we are only speaking about democratic institutions here because I think that all the governments, the 27 who are around the table, have been democratically elected. And we have democratically elected national parliaments who control their governments. And we have the democratically elected European Parliament who controls the Commission and the Council. So really to speak here about dictatorship, I think that is a joke.
But on the subject of, do you regret that there isn't more reform that's skewed towards giving people, for instance, more say inside the European Parliament with the reforms that are being proposed? Again, a lot of it seems to be down to the actual sovereign states.
Most of the reforms which are on the table now have already been agreed by the European Parliament. It has been very clear that the control of the national budgets, so that those budgets cannot go bust, that the working together in order to make the euro irreversible, all these decisions have already been taken in agreement between the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. What will happen this week is to reinforce those measures so that we can really get out of the crisis. More democratic you cannot do. The European Council is a meeting of elected governments, and one can really not say that those people do not have the backing of their populations.
Christopher Caldwell, your reaction listening in on this?
I have to say I disagree diametrically. I think that the goal of the European authorities throughout this crisis has been to evacuate sovereignty from the elected national governments. I think that the reforms that Ms. Reding speaks of as leading to more democracy, like I presume, majority voting in European instances. That does, it certainly shifts more power to Brussels, but it weakens the what most Europeans think of as their government. And I have to say that while I accept that these are democratic governments, they are less democratic than they were a month ago. The Monti government, you may like it better than the Berlusconi government, but it is less democratic than the Berlusconi government. It was installed because the president was able to name Monti a senator for life, which is not the way things are envisioned in the Italian constitution.
Claude Lanzmann, let me bring you in on this.
One, I am not an economist. I am not a money man, and I don't know much, but I spend my time reading such articles, which I don't understand.
Is the solution more Europe or less Europe?
No, I have the feeling that they don't master anything, that they are making meetings after meeting. And I think that the beginning of the whole story was very bad. The voluntarist beginning, they started with symbolic measures, and now it is revenge of reality.
All right, perhaps necessity will be the mother of invention in the coming days to come. Before we go, Stephen Clark, your books take an irreverent outsider's look at France and its mores. Some argue they'll never be the same after what transpired back in May, not here in France, but across the ocean in Lower Manhattan. All right, that was the former boss of the IMF, Dominique Strauss-Kahn. He's been cleared, or the charges have been dropped against him on a rape allegation, an attempted or sexual crime allegation that was alleged to have happened mid-May at a fancy hotel in Midtown Manhattan. People say that in France, relationships are never going to be the same again between public figures and in the workplace even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has caused a real revolution. I mean, first of all, people over here, not the politicians, obviously, because the politicians were scared by all this. You know, seeing a French politician in handcuffs, they're not at all used to that. So that was that. But a lot of ordinary people thought that was great. Suddenly, the Americans have a justice system where it doesn't matter if you're an important politician or not. If you're accused of a serious crime, they put the handcuffs on you and they investigate. And people thought that was great. And also, since then, it's true, the relationships between men and women, especially in the workplace, have changed. I think from what I hear from French women, what they're saying now is just because my boss is important, older, famous, richer, it doesn't mean he can do whatever he wants. If he does anything now, which is, there is a French law about sexual harassment, but in the past, in lots of cases, it was ignored because people, they thought, if I complain, nothing's ever going to happen. In the past, if this had happened in France with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, nothing would have happened. It would have all been swept under the carpet. And that's changed. Now, women actually think, if something happens to me, I can complain. People are going to listen. It doesn't matter who the person is. And there has been a kind of cultural revolution now. Things have changed. It's made, from what women are telling me, is it's made them feel much freer and more protected, because at last, there's no one can get away with whatever they want anymore. In the past, French politicians, or this whole French elite, they thought they could do what they wanted to the unimportant people down below them, and now they can't anymore. So it's been a great sort of revolution.
Let me ask Viviane Reding. You're not French. You're from Luxembourg, but has this debate extended beyond France's borders? Is it something that comes up in conversation at the Commission?
people like scandals everywhere, and if you have scandals which are making the headlines on television, on the internet and in the newspapers, people are speaking about this. I think it will be high time that we come back to earth and that we speak about the people of Europe and not about scandals.
But in this case, we're talking about gender relations, that men for too long got away with too much. Is that not a topic of conversation?
A topic of conversation which we do have in Europe is how do we manage to get women into work? How do we manage to break down this difference in income between men and women for nearly the same jobs? How do we manage that women do not lose out because they are mothers? So I think this is the impact which politics will have, hopefully, on the real day life of the women, and I think we should concentrate on these questions and leave the scandals behind us.
Claude Lanzmann, we talked about the gender relations in all of this, but do you think the French view their politicians differently from before? Do you think that the perception of a politician has changed?
In one way, yes. In one way, yes. Because I think that such discoveries and such scandals never happened. It happened in the French political history, but to such an extent and with such media awareness and publicity, not to such an extent. And of course, this cannot be without effects, without consequences.
Christopher Caldwell, in this globalized world, how do you feel as though values, are they becoming more homogenous as a result when we see a story like this, which has made headlines around the world?
Yes. And I part of me agrees with Stephen Clark that the democratic nature of American justice is laudable. A powerful man who is suspected of doing something wrong will in many cases be treated like an unpowerful man suspected of doing things wrong. But it is a very specific style of justice, and we should not ignore that in this case it failed. It was based on a false allegation, on falsehoods, and so that will that ought to temper our zeal to universalize justice systems around the world.
All right, Christopher Caldwell, you told us that for you the biggest story of these past 5 years is definitely the financial crisis. Viviane Reding, when you look back on the last 5 years, what is for you the defining moment, you would say?
I think the way the world has shrinked. 5 years ago, in all our member states, we looked at our own problems, the French at the French problems, the German at the German problems. We have finally managed to look at the problems of the Europeans. The French know about what is happening in Germany, the Germans know what is happening in France. So this is a real breakthrough. This has been, of course, linked very strongly also to the internet. The world has become very, very small, and we know at once when something is happening at the other part of the universe. So I do believe that the way we are looking at politics, at society, and also at scandals, we have just spoken about one, has dramatically changed, and things will not be small as they were before.
All right, won't be able to put the genie back in the bottle, certainly when it comes to the issues of democracy that we've mentioned throughout this past hour. I want to thank you for joining us, Stephen Clark, Claude Lanzmann. I want to thank Robert Fisk for joining us from Dublin, Viviane Reding from Brussels, and Christopher Caldwell from Washington. And really, we want to also say thank you to all of you. A special thought To those who preceded me in this chair, Andrea Sankey and Mark Owen, who you'll be hearing from a little bit later on, and from all of us, thanks for watching. We're back tomorrow for more.